All right. So, what's your question?
Um, so I've been noticing when I'm making dukkha and then realizing it, gladdening the mind, um, feeling some joy, and going back to my object and staying with it for a bit. Sometimes I find it'll move off quite quickly, but like, and I don't necessarily want to be just putting in like the full one, because like if I really go out, I have like a pretty long process of gladdening the mind. And I was just wondering, do you have tips for like I guess like subtly and quickly, or like having options, I guess, because like what I usually do is when I gladden the mind, oh look, you remembered, and I smile. Sometimes I'll repeat something about practicing correctly and saying like,
Mm-hmm.
oh look, I did it, I can do this. I just come back to the breath. So I'll say like a couple things to myself. I'll smile and take a deep breath, etc. And then, but like, then
But that's
say
not good enough, huh? But like,
no, I don't know. Sometimes it feels cumbersome. Sometimes doing it all the time. When like say I'll go back to the object, even if it feels pretty good. I don't necessarily feel like I need to just like on the next one be like going the full route of gladdening the mind. Because it already feels fine. Feels good even, and it feels a bit
okay.
like serendipitous doing it.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. The first thing that I would say is let's use the breath as a starting point or an anchor for this method also. And that is that so long as you do remember the breath, knowing when each breath is an in breath and an out breath, that's as far as you actually need to work.
Okay.
That's if there's any place to go to, it would be that. Because if the mind wanders away from the breath, it more than likely will wander away into hindrance. In fact, that's the only way it can wander into hindrance. And so maintaining the breath, knowing that you're breathing in or you're breathing out, and that it's a deep breath with each breath, and that you play with it from time to time in the sense of reminding yourself to take an extra specially deep breath or a more
Right.
noticeable breath on a regular basis, then that activity is also a form of gladdening the mind.
Right.
And so we're looking at it from the position that we're not wanting to turn it into a ritual or a
Mm-hmm.
ritualized way of doing things. That we're not
Right.
trying to develop the skill of ritualizing a particular procedure or not. And in fact, if you think about it like that, mantras can be absolutely marvelous toys to play with. They're really, really excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But they are also very likely to not be used properly, but rather turn them into a ritual. Now, an example of that would be in India, they have certain um, very common mantras like Om Namah Shivaya. If you look, that's the Om Namah Shiva. Now, if you are dedicated and devoted to Shiva, then that can mean something to you. It has to do then with using that mantra to actually gladden the mind. And yet it can become ritualized so that the student is just saying it over and over and over again.
So like ahum, 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 and you're just sort of like putting in the putting in the time on the clock.
Right, without actually gaining the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
They call in Islam, they'll call the name Allah but never invite him actually in. Another one would be Ram, 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 Ram. Now, if someone is devoted and dedicated to Ram and really thinks about how he feels in the presence of Ram, a god, then it can be, let us say, an aspect of gladdening the mind. But more than likely, it's going to turn into a ritual.
Right.
And so I'm warning you to not let whatever you're doing to gladden the mind be turned into a ritual, but rather that it's got to become natural.
Right.
But it's still going to take some effort to put into it. And so right now we're saying that the right effort to put into it is the effort to keep watching the breath, to make sure that you are watching the breath, but you don't have to formalize any of the other parts of it. In fact, it's actually better to not have to use the words, but rather just the experience of,
Right.
and it kind of becomes wordless. And so we use the words, and then the words become routine. They become ritualized rather than of being of the real value of doing it. So that's an important point. And so the way to work with that is to make sure that really the only thing that you're doing is you're kind of paying attention to the breath in a way that allows you to feel really good while you're actually doing something else. You can do this while actually reading. What you're reading is up to you. I'm not going to get into making value judgments about what you're reading, but that you can do this while you're reading. And that by doing it like this, it actually adds to the reading because your intention is to read the book or whatever, the article on the blog, the whatever. And the intention is that while I'm reading this intently, I'm also going to be watching the breath, almost as if I'm synchronizing the two of them together so that they dance together. And you'll notice that by doing that your reading skill improves. A more obvious and clear example of it is that if a driver is watching his breath while he's driving, he becomes quite mindful in driving. He becomes quite excellent driver.
Right.
Because he's watching his breath. He's here now. His mind is not wandering away to someplace.
Right.
And then getting lost in thought.
Can I ask a question? So when you said don't let it become ritualized, what I sort of thought how I understood what you meant was I shouldn't let this gladdening the mind thing just be a ritual. So I go like, woohoo, yay, I did it, and I'm not feeling what those words actually not should, but when done correctly will bring. And it should, though, like it's the words are just pointers to like, I actually did it. This is good. I'm supposed to try and evoke that feeling of actually like, hell yeah, I did it.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Rather than ritualize it or use it as a mantra or whatever like that. No, your job is to develop the skill of actually feeling like a champion. You can feel like a champion. You can roar like a lion.
And when you said this,
but it's a skill to be developed.
Yeah. Just so breathing as a sort of like a task to do for the mind while I'm actually doing another thing as well. And the breath is sort of just as a background focus. All I'm thinking is like,
I don't use the word background, but I understand what you're getting at. In fact, it's not in the background. It's just a lot of other stuff is happening too. But as long as you come back to the breath as much for the in and the out, that's all that's necessary, is to keep track of the fact that you're breathing in well, you're breathing in fairly deeply, and that you're breathing out well. You're breathing out deeply. That's all. And that takes so little amount of the actual time. The mind is quite fast. And so you can read a full sentence or so. So that would be a way of working with this, with incorporating them together, is at the end of the sentence, take a deep breath, and then while you're reading it, do an out breath. And when you get to the end of the sentence, you can do it again. That, in fact, you might experiment with how many sentences that it's going to take.
Okay.
All right. So that's a way of working with that and staying in the moment. But the important point is that you're doing these together so that you are actually gaining great benefit from this reading.
Right.
As opposed to just letting the mind wander around the words while it's wandering around, and it's only the eyes that are doing the reading. The rest of it is thinking about the reading.
Right. Why is it that we can't focus? Because what I feel like you're pointing out is like, there's something about how we think about focus, maybe in the West or in general, but it's like, it doesn't seem to, if I just direct everything, like all of my mental capacity at like the reading, I do get distracted. But then if I add the breathing in, like you suggest, and of course it will help. Why is it that, you'd think adding an extra task to another task would make it harder, but it seems to make it easier. Why is that?
A lot of it has to do with intention.
Okay.
Or let us say the right attitude.
Okay.
In the sense of, I can do this, or this can be done. And that we don't often bring that attitude up. And so we will fall into the habit of reading that we got when we were kids, which means I'm reading this because I was told to, rather than reading this because I really want to read it and I really am interested in what's there.
And this kind of comes to like our future mind too, because sometimes when I'm reading, even if I find the material good, there's another part of the brain that's like, I'll skip ahead in the chapter and see where it's finished. I'm like, oh, I've only got 10 more pages or whatever. And it's like, even doing that seems to put strain on the reading itself, though, because I'm like, all right, and now it's 9 pages left. Now it's 8 pages,
I bet you learned to do that when you were in school.
Yeah, I think so.
And that you did it on stuff that you really didn't want to read. And so now that you've gotten into the habit of doing that, now you do that even for stuff that you want to read. And so that's an important point to recognize, that, yeah, that the mind does that, have those set patterns to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's an old pattern, it's an old habit, and it's almost always a sequence of events that winds up in a state of dissatisfaction, boredom. And in fact, boredom may be building with each page. Even though the joy of from 5 to 4 to 3 is happening, the boredom is also getting even more so. So they're building up together. A better way of reading is when you read and you're just reading and getting some stuff, and you get to, and is that all there is? He quit? And so that's another way of reading, is that you're just reading. And the best kind of reading is done in the here now, and the best way to stay in the here now is using the breath as an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And that works for reading books. It works for driving in normal traffic. It really works when you decide this is no longer normal traffic. This is my road, and here I go. And it also works when we're in conversation with people, to be able to actually listen to them, to actually hear, to take deep breaths and just listen to what they're saying. Because most people are trying to plan on what they're about to say themselves. Why is it? You know what I'm talking about, the urge to talk when someone else is talking.
Yeah.
It's actually an urge. That urge, according to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa in his book called The Prison of Life, is actually instinctual, and that it can be looked at from the perspective of showing off or preening, strutting, or making the vocal statement, I am here, or me too. In Thailand, they would say, Pai Doi, Pai Doi. And Pai means somebody's going someplace, I want to go too. So that's the whole quality of the me too. This is actually right out of the survival mode, or the survival instinct, the self-preservation instinct. And so what that means is, well, why does the self-preservation instinct rear its ugly head? The answer is because it doesn't feel safe and secure. So we have to look at that too. Why is it that I'm not feeling safe and secure? It might be because I'm shut down. And so the breathing then will help you feel safe and secure. So in that regard, deep breathing, doing anapanasati while you're listening to someone else talk, will actually help you to listen to what they're saying rather than having this urge to talk come up. Very interesting the way that the body, mind, brain kind of thing works like that in order to create dissatisfaction in our lives. And when we get wise to it, then it's almost like, how can these advanced hairless monkeys finally become human? The answer is because they have to use that human part of the brain rather than letting the reptilian brain take over. And the reptilian brain will certainly take over whenever, anytime there's any feelings to be done. And so that feeling of dissatisfaction then is kicked off by that self-preservation instinct, where in fact things are not dangerous at all. But we feel as if that there's dangers. We feel as if things are not satisfactory. That often when we don't understand someone, instead of asking them to clarify, we start to argue with them. And that sometimes even a third person can come in and say, you guys are actually saying the same thing. Why are you arguing with each other? But it takes an outsider to see that. So in that regard, become your own outsider.
Right.
Right. What we mean by that is to let go of the me that is in the conversation. And we can best do that with the breath, because then we've got enough oxygen, we've gotten the brain going, and we can really look at what's going on, so that when these urges arise, we don't have to flitter off with them. Glad you used that word urge. I've been thinking about introducing it to the conversations. But if you look at it another way, in TA, they call these urges, they call them drivers.
Transactional analysis?
Yeah, transactional analysis, TA, Eric Berne, and that crowd of super psychologists with their redefinition of Freud and from ego, superego, and id into parent, adult, child.
Right.
So it's in fact in the TA parlance, the adult is that which needs to be developed, and the superego or the parent needs to be quiet. We need to stop listening to the parent, start paying attention to what's happening now rather than living in the past. And then giving more free rein to the child who is tormented by the parent. Or the id is tormented by the superego. When I use the word parent and child, it's both descriptive and confusing. And so I want to bring back that, no, we're talking about this superego, which means that it's a manufactured, learned system, and that it's natural that we do that, or instinctually we do that. It comes right out of the instincts. But it's not the instinct itself, it's all the clutter that instinct has gathered together. In the instinct is called the nesting instinct, but the Buddha describes it as attachments to rites, rules, and rituals, which means attachment to the way things should be done. And that we do that with ourselves a lot. That's why people have jobs, is because they think they're supposed to. All right? Right out of the superego. How many people have a job because they really like it? And how many people have a job because they think they need it?
Most people.
So that's an interesting point then, that most people are in fact in the need of things just because that's the stored programming. And so back to this being in the moment, continuing to watch the breath when these urges come up. The urge is coming out of the child ego state, but the urge is to please the parent. Because the child has been lied to the point that he believes the delusion that if he pleases the parent, if he does what he's told to do, the parent will reward the child. But that's a lie. That doesn't happen. In fact, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about this as the woeful state of being reborn as an animal. And so the animal in us, or the child ego state, or the reptilian brain, we can think of as, even though I've got 3 or 4 different descriptions of it, I'm pointing at all the same stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And this animal, imagine that you saw a donkey. And this donkey was walking around in a circle, dragging a log on his back that was attached to the center point of this circle that he's walking around. And there you have the owner shoving sugarcane into this thing, and that the donkey is grinding the sugarcane, but the donkey doesn't get any sugarcane juice. Sugarcane juice is sold at 10 rupees a glassful to passers-by. But the donkey doesn't get any of the sugarcane juice. All right? So that's how most people live their lives. They live their lives as a donkey, doing what they're told to do and never getting the benefit of their labor. Another example is a plow mule. He's out there plowing the field. That mule would have enjoyed all of that pasture grass if it had been untilled. But now he's out there forced to till that land, to plow that land up, which means that he's not going to get any benefit except hay. Before he had a nice pasture. Now all he's going to get to eat is hay. Why? Because that's the fruit of his labor.
Okay.
And that happens in Australia, and it happens in the US. It happens all over the world. In fact, people are exploiting people on a regular basis, and that no one is getting the benefit of their labor. Even the very rich man who is stealing money from his employees by not paying them enough, he's still not enjoying his life well enough. He may be preening, he may be very proud, but in deep inside, he's very insecure. He might get caught. He might lose it all. And that another point is that his greed was not satisfied. So that deep longing for more and more and more didn't go away. And he thought that if I go get what I feel that I need, then I won't need anymore. The need doesn't go away. And so even the rich man who was stealing money from other people, he still is that donkey. Everyone lives our lives like that. So, what's the solution to that donkey? Well, that donkey, in fact, could get the attitude that, hey, this is really nice. If this is what I got to do, at least let me enjoy it. But the the donkey does not have that capability. He's not smart enough to realize that he can get out of his drudgery, because his drudgery is really all mental anyway. And another way would be is the donkey could just stop. He's fine until they put that log on his back, and now he stops. And they can beat him or whatever they want to do, but if he's not going to do it, they'll soon turn him loose or sell him to someone else. And he doesn't have to pull that log anymore, simply because he stops pulling that log. He can quit. But the donkey doesn't know he has that option. And most humans don't know they have the options. That's what the whole teaching of the Buddha is all about. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has actually got an article on the lion's roar. They published an article which is part of a book, which says, "Karma, the choice is yours." Now, in this reference to the karma, he's talking about everything that you've been doing before, all of your past. Just because you've done it that way in the past doesn't mean that you've got to do it that way now. And that you've got choices. The question is, can you remember that you've got choices? That's the whole point, is to remember you've got choices about every moment. And so what we do is we work towards, and in fact we enjoy ourselves towards enjoyment.
Okay.
Because it's a skill to be developed, because it's a skill that you haven't given yourself your whole life. Instead, you've been given yourself, do what you're told to do, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. That just brought back a mini flash to things my dad had said to me when I was a little boy.
That's a good insight. Now you recognize what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And you do have choices in your life, but you have to remember that. So keep that in mind whenever you start hearing that in your mind. You can also put them in. That's my dad talking to me. That's where I got that stuff, but I don't have to keep it. And I certainly don't have to behave according to it right now, because I can see it right now. Off you go into the wild blue yonder. Did you turn your video off? Yes, you did. Okay, it's back on again.
Sorry, my friend just my friend's called me. All good.
Okay, I understand. So, where we were going with this is down to that level of urges, that you use that word urge.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what we learn to have choices about only when we can see these urges. Now in TA, they have the 5 urges or the 5 drivers. One of them is, actually, I'll give you the list. Please me, try hard, be perfect, be strong, and hurry up. Hurry up is actually very much related to restlessness.
Yep.
And so that was the one that I had very strongly.
You had restlessness?
I used to.
Right.
Yep, sure. A bit left now and then. Very rarely. I can tell this also comes in various degrees. But these drivers, and one that I find very curious is the one called please me. Because please me means it's actually depreening behavior. It's strutting or showing off, and that it's quite often done right after someone tells a lie. And so they want to get you to agree with them. I'll give you an example of that behavior. How often have you seen that behavior? More subtle forms of it is done by Donald Trump on a regular basis. It's almost like you can watch his videos and tell when he's lying just by watching his facial expressions. Not that I would bother to do that much, but from time to time, you know, oh, there he is. So there's a lot that can be said from these drivers. Actually drive physical behavior. They drive our feelings, and it often drives also what thoughts that we're going to have that are associated with that. And so when you use the word urges, I say gotcha, because I know exactly what you're talking about. And the deepest urge of all is this urge of I am. That's the urge that we then attach to and identify with objects or with ideas or with ways of doing things or just in preening or showing off.
Things that you're proud of.
Pardon?
Things that you're proud of, and things that you're really like, ooh, look at this, you know?
Well, it would be when someone else is talking that we want to talk to. That's an example of that urge. And it comes out of I exist. Me too. Pai Dui, as they say in Thailand. Descartes, the French philosopher, had the phrase, I think, therefore I am. But he had it wrong more than one way. But the way that I like to phrase it is, he said, I think, therefore I think I am. But another way of considering it is I urge. Therefore, that urge becomes me. or I become the urge.
Yeah, I feel like this is touching on something I know quite a bit. It's like this, sometimes, something I'm not like, I don't know, whatever it is, I get this image of something, and it's like, I know it's like a desire or an urge, and then I'm like, I guess I'm trying to not just go like, yeah, full on with it. And then, sometimes rationalizations will come up, like that I'm not consciously sitting there like, I want this thing, like the I that is speaking now, and I'm going to make a plan to think. It's like, like a little whisper from another part of the mind or whatever will be like, like it's like an argument is building in my head to myself, but but it's coming from not me, like it's because I can see this stuff come up a bit, and it even gets a bit like I guess it's a voice can even get a bit like
It's a
petulant.
voice that speaks so fast because it speaks a different language, is another way of thinking about it. That the English language that we use to talk to ourselves and with each other is actually a much slower language than this internal language that can spring up like that. The mind is really fast when it's using that more natural language that's deep inside. And
This
in
like
fact, you could almost go so far as to say it's the language of the urge.
okay, is this like sorry, especially after we've just had a long talk about interrupting. I just I can't is this like that thing of, I don't know. It feels like I've done processing on a situation before. It's like, oh, this is what's happening, and it's like I haven't consciously sat down and thought, oh, this is a bad guy, this is a good guy, these are my friends, this is bad. There's something going on here, and this is bad, and then I start and like in my mind I'll have like an idea of like, oh, I'm in the wrong, or this person's in the wrong, and this person's mad, and I haven't sat down and consciously thought any of it. It's just I've got like my own little internal, like, this is what's happening.
You're beginning to become the observer, that you're no longer a participant in the fight. You're no longer doing the mud wrestling. Now you're standing and watching the mud wrestling. That would be a way of saying it, with all of those other people out there wrestling in the mud with each other. What are they? And always the mud wrestling is done under that urge of me too, or I count, or my life matters, pi dui. All of that phraseology can be put under that urge of I am, or I exist, or I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And that I exist or I'm here can often in animals be seen in preening behavior, like the duck that chases people around, or
Flip heads around.
the peacock with his
Yeah.
plumage, or actually the grooming that monkeys do, or the grooming that all kinds of animals do. A lot of the grooming comes out of that self-preservation instinct, and in human beings, instead of grooming and preening, which is our instinctual nature, we also do it with showing off. That our preening is a showing off. It's a me too, or I'm here, or I count. And so this is something to become aware of. Now that I'm introducing it to you, you'll begin to see, what? I'm doing that all the time. Or you'll begin to see it happening more often. is a better way of saying it.
I've definitely that a little bit, especially recently. Sometimes it feels like it's not always a bad, like, or I'm telling myself it's not a bad thing. You know, it's like if I met, like in that situation I talked about where it's all scary, what comes up is like, oh, but I better get involved and get everyone to simmer down, you know?
Well, spreading your joy is the right way of going, because you're not joining them in the me too. You're actually standing outside of the circle. You're not mud wrestling. You're standing outside laughing at them mud wrestling. That's a particular different way of looking at it. It's still a little bit of a self, but this is one that's much more wholesome, as you were indicating.
Right. Because the thing is, I heard another teacher say, we're not just trying to obliterate the self or anything like that. It's more like understanding how this works and the process of dependent origination as well. Because, like you said, that's a good, it's a good thing if people are upset, I will help this person, and it's like, a good thing.
How about instead of I can help this person, it's, is this a time for joy? Completely different frame of reference.
Right.
This is a time for joy, because if you have the joy, then there's not much self in it. There's just joy, that in fact the self is the vehicle for the dissatisfaction. And so it's a different kind of self, it's a more subtle self. But the important point here is that this is not a self that's suffering. And so I'm actually using the different language. This is a time for joy. Another one would be a way of just another way of saying it. They're unhappy, but I'm joyful. Now, it can be said that way, but a better way of saying it would be, this is the time for joy, because that takes kind of the self out of it. And so this is the time for joy. It also means it's a time to spread the joy, because you're going to be overjoyed, so filled with joy that it just leaks out all over the place. While they're full of shit, you're full of joy. This is mudita. This is sympathetic vibration. So just because there's demonstrating one vibration doesn't mean that you've got to join through some urge to join that vibration.
Oh, shit. That something just clicked a bit there. How did you know that? That's such a thing, I feel, though. Like, it's like, oh, everyone's feeling this way, but I'm feeling this way, and then it builds on itself. It's like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should feel that way, which is the way that the others are feeling. And then, and obviously that leads to a certain place of like value judgments about myself, and obviously just like a lot of dukkha.
Precisely. Now things are clicking. That's excellent. That's the whole point of having these conversations. If I can use words that you use and feed them back to you, so that I got it. I can see what's happening now. That's great. So now that you can see that and understand it, start looking for it in the moments. And that the best way to understand that is by at least keeping track of the in breath and the out breath, so that you know how you're breathing. And then you've got a whole lot of the rest of the time to deal with the rest of the here now. Because believe me, here now is really busy.
And with the breathing in and out thing, you're not asking for, like, you know how some people will be like, you need to zoom in on a place where the breath is and drill into it. Because what it sounds like is, as long as I have a sense that I'm breathing, and like you said, the qualities of a good breath, it's all good.
Just the understanding that you're breathing in, and just the understanding that you're breathing out. Because right view will have you breathing the right kind of in breath and the right kind of out breath. And so you can go about your reading or your conversations or your driving or your karate or you're feeding the dog or whatever is happening. We can do it without jumping in through urges into the mud wrestling pit.
This makes things a lot simpler. Because I was wrongly thought that, like, probably because I said before, I've gotten my Dhamma knowledge from, like, bits and pieces on the internet, and obviously you get a bit of, like, stuff from the Visuddhimagga type places. Because I was kind of thinking that I had to, like, while I had something in mind, I also had to be extremely into that thing, and like, it's like like if I was breathing, it's like I'm just feeling my breath at the abdomen, or to the most that I can while I'm doing my daily chores or whatever, like if you were doing that kind of practice in the day. But like when I do that, all I end up doing is I'm just trying to push out what's going on around me, or I'm getting dissatisfied by, like.
That's way too much effort.
Yeah.
That's too much effort. How can when we do too much effort be relaxed? No, we want to take just the right amount of effort to be relaxed. Relaxed is a word they use, sometimes the word tranquility. In the Pali, the word passive is used in the sense of pass. So you can think of that in two ways. One is that you've got this whole life full of traffic that is passing before your eyes. And we start thinking, oh, I'm that, and oh, I'm this, and there I go, and all of that. But really what we're learning to do is to stop grasping and holding to all of those things that just merely pass us by. Let it pass. Let the train go by. It's passing. And by letting it pass, we become passive because we're not grasping and clinging to that which passes in front of us.
And by saying I am, that's already clinging, and then, that starts the whole process of building, and, it'll become bigger and bigger the more we're like, that's mine, because then I've got to protect it.
Precisely.
I'm an artist and I draw good, and if people say I draw bad, that's bad, that kind of thing.
Right. Well, in fact, I just had this conversation with Willie in coding, that he was the code was criticized in a meeting, but because he wrote the code, he says it's my code. So when the code is criticized, he's got to feel bad until he wakes up to the fact, oh no, that code was written 2-3 years ago. That was written in the past, and I am not the coder who coded that. And not only that, but it ran for 2 or 3 years just fine. And now they find a problem? Why should I feel bad? I should feel wonderful that the code lasted so long. But oh no, the mind is, oh no, I wrote that. The code is now bad. It's being criticized in the meeting. Therefore, I'm bad too. Because I attach to that code. I become that code. So when your art is criticized, you become the art. So that it's not just the art that's being criticized, it's me inside that's being criticized.
This is pretty Wow, this explains a fair bit, because I had a instance the other day. I was a bit upset about how I reacted to it, but that's neither here nor there. I remember my housemate criticized me about doing the dishes in a certain way. I left something in the sink and had, just being a bit lazy. And
he was being
when
a bit preening. He was showing off. Ha ha, look at you. You did the bad thing in the sink there. And instead of seeing really the dynamics of what's going on, he attaches to him, you attach to you, and everybody feels bad for a moment.
I was like this, and I remember I saw a fair bit of the content coming up, especially because, I was trying not to let that urge of making a scene, or, even just trying to be like, all right, is this actually really something to get upset about? And, it's like what you said. There's this one part of me, it's like, but what about all the stuff that you do, huh?
So there's your preening coming up.
Yeah.
There's the showing off coming up,
And then,
yeah, they in American politics they call that a whataboutism. Oh yeah, about me. Well, what about you? What about what you did? What about this over there? And it's called that a whataboutism, but it's actually just a demonstration of this urge to protect the self. When in fact, if you weren't attached to that drawing, in fact, if somebody criticized the drawing and you take a quick look and you recognize you didn't do that drawing, then you're not going to feel the same as if you take a quick look and that is your drawing. So why do you attach to one drawing and not another?
well, I'm not actually an artist. So I'm not really. I was just
But you know
using
what
art.
I'm getting at. You understand what I'm getting at. We
Yeah.
can use the example of code too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's the point. Is that when that thing, whatever it is criticized, if I attach to that as I, me, or mine, then that's the fear, that's the terror that I'm being attacked, and therefore the self-preservation mechanism kicks in with this preening behavior, with this showing off, this strutting around that manifests itself as what about you or what aboutism. In other words, what you're really saying is me too, or I'm as good as you are, or don't criticize me, where in fact they weren't criticizing you. That was all happening within your own mind. They were criticizing a drawing, and you were not the drawing.
Oh man. And even something like an action that you've done, if you take that action to be you, like because it's like, oh, well, I did the dishes then, or so it's like the me, then it's only like
I am the
way,
dirty dishes, right?
and I'm the bad thing in the sink or whatever, or the bad thing in the sink's my fault,
Mm-hmm. Because of that time from when we were animals, that all they're going to do is beat the animal. They're not ever going to reward it. The donkey never gets the carrot. He never gets the carrot, but he does get the stick. So long as the mule is hooked to that wagon, he's got to pull it around. He's going to grasp for that carrot. Doesn't happen. The carrot's on a stick out in front of the donkey. And so as the donkey moves forward, the stick is moving forward, and so is the carrot. He never quite gets that carrot. That's the whole story of the carrot and the stick. The carrot's a bait and switch, and the stick is what we're trying to avoid. And so when somebody hit your drawing, they hit you. Or when somebody hit Willie's code, they hit him. And so he has a reaction to it. That's the self-preservation instinct. We're trying to protect and preserve a self that doesn't really need protecting because it really wasn't attacked. The drawing was attacked. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says it like this: nothing is worth a clinging or attaching to as I, me, or mine. Now, we can become attached to things, but not in a selfish way. Doesn't have to be that way. There's many, many things that are really wholesome and worthy of attaching to. You want a list?
Are they the 7 factors of awakening?
Right, exactly. How about this present moment? How about attaching to being super mundane and away from the world? It's better to attach to be away from the world than it is to being attached to the world. And so we can attach ourselves to being above it all. We can attach ourselves to the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path. So there's many really valuable, wholesome things to attach to. And that those are the kinds of things that we would, if we're wise, when we are able to, let us say, manage our thoughts, that we'll tend to have wholesome thoughts.
Sorry. Okie dokie. Is this part of what they call, this is like part of what they call ignorance, attaching stuff that isn't you and saying, this is me, this is mine, this is myself?
Precisely. We're as dumb as that mule. Dumb as that donkey. But if we look closely, if we got this noggin going, when we have that wisdom door open and can see what's really going on, then we can let go.
Right. And this is where it's like you need to know what's going on, and then when you know that it's going on, the right view kicks in to know it's like there is another way, which is taking a deep breath and coming to the here now.
Got choices. But we have to remember, that's why sati is such a valuable tool, to keep practicing and practicing, to wake up. And so sati will actually be developed if you start just being mindful of the breath, knowing only that it's an in-breath and only that it's an out-breath, and that you're doing that with as many of the breaths throughout the day that you can. They say there's about 14,000 breaths a day. That sounds a little high. Actually, that would be a good experiment. At least do it to the point of counting every breath that you take for a full hour and multiply by 24. But we're not going to be mindful of every breath. But the more of them that we are, especially if we're intending, like if we sit down in the car to drive the car, my full intention is I'm going to be watching my breath while I'm driving.
Mm-hmm.
And so the watching of the breath is very high during that drive. Now, I'm not getting every breath, but I'm getting quite a lot of them, and I'm really quite in the here now. And so that's the way to start to practice. And that also, because of the breath, that we are constantly mindful of just the in-breath or just the out-breath, then when those urges come up, we'll catch them too. You can begin to see that urge as it arises. Why? Because you've already got sati in gear. You're watching the breath.
Okay. It's, Lord, do I have the? No, I lost it. I had one last question, I think, but
Well, let us hope that satisfaction does not create loss of memory. But in a way, that's not a bad thing. That in fact, it's better to just forget about it. An example of that is within Buddhism, we don't talk about forgiveness the way that Christians do. That Christianity is really, really big on forgiveness. Within Buddhism, we have a better way of looking at it, and that is we don't have to forgive him. We just forget about it.
Let it go.
Well, not just let it go so that we can grab it later, but literally forget about it. And so then if the guy comes to ask for forgiveness, then certainly we can give it to him. We can give the forgiveness easily because we've already forgot the incident. So that's the easy way to do it, is just forget about it. As opposed to clinging to it. Throw it out. I'll introduce something to you now, just as a basic point. And that is that if I'm holding something and I let it go, that for that object that I have let go of, I am now dead. In other words, that cup, if I'm holding that cup in my hand, then I have that cup. But if I set that cup down, then that cup is, the cup considers me gone, or that I'm dead to that cup. So if you extrapolate that out, you can recognizing that that urge is basically to remind people or to remind the cup that I exist. I'm going to come back in and grab hold of it. And so a lot of this letting go is the beginning of the letting go is to let go first of the feelings, but ultimately the letting go is to letting go of this attachment that we have with this self-preservation instinct that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says nothing is worth clinging to. Let it go. And you can remember to in that regard of those urges, you don't have to grab hold of that urge. You can let that urge go too, or the intense pain of a tooth at the dentist office, or the my code being criticized in the meeting, or whatever it is that I'm attaching to. But I got to remember. That's why we keep wanting to keep this sati going, and the way to keep it going easily, the easy, like idling, like an automobile engine. We don't have to race anymore. All we have to do is just keep the engine going. Just keep it idling with an in and an out, and an in and an out, just like the cylinder goes up, but it goes down, and it goes up, but it goes down. And as long as we're watching that, then we're idling, so that when any urges come in, we'll be there for them. So you don't have to constantly keep telling yourself to gladden the mind, but you want to continue to gladden the mind. Because telling yourself to gladden the mind is almost like doing it as a ritual, rather than just being pleased that I'm watching the breath. It's actually a simple process, but it is so alien to the way we're raised.
Really goes against a lot of things. It's like, even if you are doing it, there's like flicking ups of like, oh yeah, but you can't feel this good right now, because what if something bad comes and gets you while you're feeling good? Better go and check that something's out there, not out there, or blah blah blah.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And so if we can let the blah, 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 blah just be blah, 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 because blah, 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 blah is actually quite easy to forget about. But if he says, you're a blah, 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 that's hard to forget. And so it better not to attach to it. And so remember to not attach, because that's the normal way that we've been doing it. That's our habit, is to see things in relationship to the self rather than allowing things to be just as they are. And your job is merely to be an observer.
Shit.